A millionaire CEO walked into a courthouse for business, but left with a 6-year-old girl who whispered, "My parents don't love me." He had no idea that single moment would change all their lives forever. The courthouse buzzed with the usual tension of a busy weekday morning. Lawyers walked briskly through polished marble corridors, clerks sorted through overflowing stacks of files, and security guards stood near the metal detectors, their eyes scanning the crowd with practiced indifference. Owen Miller had been in and out of this building dozens of times before. For someone like him, CEO of one of the largest construction firms on the West Coast, courtrooms were simply another extension of the boardroom, another place where deals were argued, contracts upheld, and millions were made or protected. Dressed in a tailored light blue suit that clung perfectly to his broad frame, his dark hair neatly combed back, and his ice blue eyes sharp and alert, Owen moved with confidence and purpose. He hadn't come for anything dramatic, just a quick pickup of finalized documents regarding a zoning dispute. His driver was waiting outside, engine running, and his assistant was already texting him about a meeting he'd be late for if this took more than 10 minutes. But all of that came to a halt when, walking through the second-floor corridor toward the records office, Owen slowed. Just ahead, on a long wooden bench by the courtroom doors, sat a little girl. At first, she blended in with the neutral tones of the marble floor and beige walls, but something about her posture made him stop. She sat curled in on herself, knees hugged tightly to her chest, her shoulders trembling. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She wore a red t-shirt beneath a faded blue denim jacket, a matching denim skirt, and white sneakers that had seen better days. Her dark, curly hair framed her tear-streaked face, and her hands clutched the straps of a small, worn-out backpack resting beside her. Owen frowned, stepping closer, unable to ignore the strange image. A child, completely alone, crying in a place where innocence had no business being alone. He slowed to a stop in front of her and crouched down to her level, lowering his voice. "Hey," he said gently. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't answer at first. She blinked at him, surprised by the attention, and wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her lower lip trembled. "Why are you crying?" he asked, careful not to scare her. "Is someone here with you?" She shook her head slowly. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely more than a whisper. "My parents left me," she said. "They don't want me. They don't love me." The words hit Owen like a punch to the chest. He had been in courtrooms where people screamed, where fortunes were lost, where threats were exchanged, but never had 6 words unraveled him the way these did. There was no dramatics in her tone. She wasn't being difficult or acting out. She was simply stating a fact she believed with her whole heart. He blinked, frozen for a moment, unsure how to process what he had just heard. Then he stood up and looked around, trying to spot anyone who might be looking for a child. There was no one. Just strangers walking past, each buried in their own urgency. He quickly turned and called out to his assistant, Marie, who had been following a few steps behind. "Marie," he said, his tone sharper than usual. "Stay with her. Please. Don't let her out of your sight. Get her some water, a snack if you can find one. I'll be back." Marie nodded without question and sat next to the girl, offering a comforting smile. Owen turned and walked straight to the records desk, bypassing the line, flashing his ID, and demanding to speak to someone from Child Services or the clerk's office, whoever was handling custody cases that morning. Something inside him had shifted, a storm of disbelief, fury, and urgency brewing in his chest. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know the full story, but he knew one thing: no child should ever be left crying on a courthouse bench, believing she wasn't loved. And if no one else was going to do something about it, then he would. Owen walked through the courthouse with long, purposeful strides, his polished shoes echoing sharply against the stone floors. What had begun as a routine administrative task now felt like something entirely different. He moved past a row of hearing rooms and into the back offices where administrative clerks managed the endless flow of legal paperwork. The familiar scent of old files, disinfectant, and cheap coffee filled the air. His presence, even in a place like this, didn't go unnoticed. A man like Owen Miller didn't blend in, he was the kind of person who seemed to command the space just by standing in it. But today, he wasn't there to command anything. He was looking for answers. At the front desk of the Family Services Division, a young woman with tired eyes looked up from her computer. Before she could greet him with the usual mechanical politeness, he spoke. "There's a little girl sitting outside courtroom 2C, he said. "She's alone. She says her parents abandoned her. I need to know what's going on." The woman blinked, caught off guard. "Do you know her name?" "No. But I need someone to find out. Now." There was something in his voice that made her take him seriously. She nodded and began typing quickly, then picked up the phone and made a quiet call to another department. Within minutes, a more senior clerk appeared, holding a slim manila folder in her hands. She was older, with gray streaks in her bun and sharp eyes behind gold-framed glasses. She glanced at Owen with cautious professionalism. "You're referring to Bella Rivers, I assume," she said. 6 years old. Brought in this morning. Her parents finalized a custody waiver about 45 minutes ago. Owen narrowed his eyes. "A custody waiver?" The woman nodded, opening the file and reading aloud without emotion. The parents, Emily and Jacob Rivers, were in the middle of a divorce. Both filed statements declaring neither party wished to retain custodial rights over the minor child. No extended family members were listed. The state is preparing emergency placement. She will be taken to a transitional shelter until a foster home becomes available. The air in the office seemed to freeze. "They just gave her up?" Owen asked, his voice low but filled with sharp disbelief. "They each signed away parental responsibility," the clerk said matter-of-factly. No one objected. The judge approved the petition. As of now, the child is a ward of the state. He felt a heat rising in his chest, a cocktail of rage and horror. This wasn't a case of abuse, or tragedy, or legal complications, it was sheer rejection. These people had decided, casually and deliberately, that their daughter was too much trouble, too much weight, too inconvenient to take with them into their new lives. They hadn't argued over her, hadn't fought to keep her. They had simply left her behind, as if she were a suitcase forgotten at the airport. "Where are the parents now?" he asked. "Gone. They left immediately after the hearing. The mother didn't even ask to say goodbye." Owen stared at the floor for a moment, trying to swallow the feeling that was building inside him. He had faced investors worth billions, construction crises that could have collapsed entire projects, but nothing had ever made his stomach twist like this. That little girl, sitting with tear-streaked cheeks on a bench outside the courtroom, had just had her entire world yanked out from under her, and no one had lifted a finger. And yet, she hadn't begged. She hadn't screamed. She had simply said, "They don't love me." Like she had already accepted it. He looked back up at the clerk, his voice now steadier but laced with iron. "I want to take emergency guardianship. Today. Right now." The clerk looked surprised. "Sir, are you related to the child?" "No." "Then the process." "I know the process," he cut in. "I know it takes time. I know what kind of background checks and approvals are usually required. But I'm not asking to take her across the country. I'm not asking to adopt her today. I'm asking for temporary guardianship until proper placement can be arranged. Give her somewhere safe to sleep tonight. Let her be with someone who actually gives a damn about her." There was silence for a moment. The woman studied him, perhaps wondering if this was some kind of publicity stunt or guilt-fueled impulse. But then she saw something in his eyes, something raw, unpolished, and absolutely sincere. She gave a slow nod and reached for the correct paperwork. "You'll need to sign several forms. We'll do a background check, but with your status, we can expedite. You'll have to be interviewed by a caseworker within the next 72 hours. I understand. As the documents were placed in front of him, Owen signed without hesitation. For the first time in a very long time, he wasn't thinking about how a decision would affect his company, or his reputation, or his schedule. He was thinking about the small human life sitting outside courtroom 2C. About the fact that she had looked up at him with hollow eyes and told him she was unloved. And he had promised himself, in that moment, that he wouldn't be another adult who walked away from her. When he returned to the hallway, Marie was still sitting beside the girl. She had stopped crying, though her eyes were red and tired. She was sipping juice from a little paper cup. When she saw Owen, her face flickered with a strange combination of hope and fear. He knelt beside her again. "Hi, Bella," he said softly, finally using the name he had just learned. "I know today has been really hard. But if you're okay with it, I'd like you to come with me. Just for now. So you don't have to be alone." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether or not she could believe the words of yet another grown-up. Then, without saying a word, she reached out her hand and placed it in his. The ride home was silent, yet it carried the kind of weight that no music or words could fill. Owen sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, sneaking glances in the rearview mirror every few moments. Bella sat quietly in the back seat, her small body nearly swallowed by the seatbelt, her face turned toward the window. She wasn't crying anymore, but her expression was distant, blank, like someone far older than 6 years should look. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask who he was. She didn't say a word. It was as if her voice had been packed away with the last of her trust. Owen had spent his life negotiating billion-dollar deals, managing crises, and outsmarting competitors. But sitting in that car, driving a broken child through the streets of Seattle, he had never felt less in control. Every instinct in him screamed to fix something, to take action. But this wasn't something that could be solved with a signature or a financial contribution. This was a human soul, wounded and raw, sitting silently behind him. When they arrived at his apartment building, the doorman was visibly surprised. Owen never brought guests home, much less children. But he gave a polite nod and opened the door as Owen stepped out and helped Bella from the car. She followed him into the elevator, still silent, clutching the straps of her tiny backpack like it was the only thing she had left. The elevator opened to the top floor, revealing Owen's penthouse, a sleek, spacious space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Puget Sound. The interior was elegant but warm, designed by someone who appreciated both function and aesthetics. Everything was in its place. Everything was clean, orderly, expensive. And suddenly, it all felt absurd. What good was a $1 million view when a 6-year-old had no home? Bella hesitated in the doorway. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, searching for danger, for judgment, for something familiar. She didn't step in until he gently said, "It's okay. You can come in." She did, carefully, like a guest in a museum. Owen led her to the living room, where a plush navy couch sat across from a large window. He knelt down so she could see his face. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Thirsty?" She shook her head no. "Would you like to lie down? Watch something on TV? Anything at all?" She just stood there. Owen paused, unsure of what to do. He wasn't a parent. He had never even considered fatherhood. His relationships had always been fleeting, disconnected. His apartment was full of books and art and carefully arranged furniture, but no toys, no softness, no signs of life. And now, standing in the middle of all of it, was a little girl who had been completely discarded by the people who were supposed to protect her. He walked to the kitchen and began preparing something simple: toast, scrambled eggs, apple slices. He didn't ask again if she was hungry. He just made the plate, placed it on the kitchen island, and quietly returned to the living room where she still stood, unmoving. "You can sit wherever you like," he said gently. "You're safe here." It was the word safe that did something. She looked at him, unsure, and finally moved toward the window. She sat cross-legged on the floor, not the couch, and stared out at the city lights as the sky darkened. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, casting a golden-purple haze over the buildings. It looked like a painting. Owen didn't say anything else. He just sat on the couch behind her, not close enough to overwhelm her, but close enough to be present. They sat like that for nearly an hour, the silence stretching between them like a fragile thread neither of them dared break. Eventually, she spoke. Her voice was so soft he almost didn't catch it. "Will I have to go to a place, with bunk beds and other kids?" Owen leaned forward slightly, heart-catching. "Not tonight," he said. "Not tomorrow either." She nodded slowly but didn't look back. "I don't like bunk beds. I fell once. And the girl below me was mean." "You won't have to sleep in a bunk bed here," he said gently. "There's a guest room down the hall. It's yours, if you want it." She turned her head slightly, eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Why are you being nice to me?" The question hit him like a slap. He searched for an answer that would make sense to her. "Because you deserve it," he said. "And because I'm not going to leave you." Her eyes lingered on his face a moment longer, looking for lies. When she didn't find any, she turned back to the window. Later that night, after she finally accepted a small bowl of apples and toast, Owen showed her to the guest room. It wasn't decorated for a child: white sheets, neutral walls, a framed abstract painting. But she looked around like she'd been handed something priceless. "I'll leave the door open," he said. "If you need anything, I'll be right across the hall." She nodded again, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something in her expression that wasn't fear or sadness. It wasn't quite trust, but it was the possibility of it. As he walked away, Owen felt something shift inside him, a feeling he couldn't name, but it wrapped around his chest like a quiet vow. He had brought home a stranger. But somehow, she didn't feel like one. And he already knew he would do anything to make sure she never sat alone on a courthouse bench again. The days that followed moved slowly, like wading through deep water. Owen quickly discovered that bringing a child into his life, even temporarily, was not just a logistical challenge, it was an emotional earthquake. Bella didn't speak much, but she watched everything. She noticed what time he turned the lights off at night, whether he locked the front door, how he stirred his coffee. She didn't cry anymore, but her silence was heavy. It wasn't peace, it was guardedness, the kind of quiet that grows in places where trust has been broken too many times. She spent most of her time in the guest room, which Owen had slowly started transforming. At first, it had been a sterile, impersonal space, but now there were signs of change: a soft quilt he picked out in warm colors, a small bookshelf filled with picture books and early readers, a stuffed rabbit he bought on a whim that ended up sitting quietly on her pillow. Bella didn't touch the toys much, but she never asked for them to be taken away, and that was enough of a signal for Owen to keep going. Each morning, he made her breakfast: toast, eggs, cereal, sometimes pancakes when he wasn't running late. She always ate, slowly and methodically, as if food was something she still didn't fully trust. She never asked for seconds, no matter how hungry she looked. It broke his heart in small, quiet ways. He made adjustments to his life without thinking twice. Conference calls were rescheduled. Meetings were shortened. His driver was replaced by school drop-offs and therapy appointments. He never told anyone at work what had happened. There were whispers, of course: Owen Miller, the most untouchable man in Seattle, showing up with a little girl, slipping out early, declining late dinners. But he didn't care. Something far more important than business had walked into his life and sat on his living room floor, whispering about bunk beds and fear, and everything else suddenly felt small. One night, about a week after she arrived, he heard her crying. It was close to midnight, and he had just shut off his computer. The sound was soft, muffled sobs, barely audible through the hallway. He walked quietly toward her room and found the door ajar. Bella was curled up on the bed, her knees pulled to her chest, her shoulders shaking. The rabbit was clenched in one arm. The lamp cast a dim, warm glow across the sheets. He knocked softly on the doorframe. "Bella," he said. "Can I come in?" She didn't answer, but she didn't push him away either. He sat on the edge of the bed and waited. After a few moments, she spoke in a shaky voice. "I had a bad dream." Owen leaned forward. "Do you want to talk about it?" She wiped her nose with the sleeve of her pajama shirt and nodded. "I dreamed I was back in the other place. With the bunk beds. And no one came." "Do you mean the shelter?" She nodded again. "They forgot me. Everyone forgot me. I kept calling, but no one came." He exhaled, his chest tight. "You're not there now," he said gently. "And I'm not going to forget you. Not tonight. Not ever." She looked up at him, eyes wet and tired. "Promise?" He didn't hesitate. "I promise." After that night, something changed. Bella didn't become cheerful overnight, trauma doesn't work like that, but a subtle shift began. She no longer avoided eye contact. She started joining him in the kitchen when he cooked. She sat with him on the couch while he read emails, silently flipping through picture books. One evening, she even giggled when he spilled flour on himself trying to bake muffins. He arranged for her to meet with a child psychologist twice a week. The first session was met with silence. The second with angry drawings. But by the third, the therapist, Dr. Lyman, reported that Bella had started to talk, not much, and not about the past, but about her dreams, about what made her nervous, about colors and stories and food she liked. It was a start. "You're doing something right," the therapist said to Owen one afternoon after a session. "She's beginning to feel safe." Owen wasn't sure what exactly he was doing, but he knew he was showing up. He was listening. He was there. Maybe that was enough. That same night, after brushing her teeth, Bella walked out of the bathroom, hugged her rabbit, and said something that stopped him in his tracks. "Can I call you something? Like, not Mr. Miller?" He crouched to her level. "What would you like to call me?" She shrugged shyly. "I don't know yet. But something nice." He nodded slowly. "You can call me anything you want, Bella." And with that, she gave him a soft smile, then turned and walked toward her room, her footsteps light. It wasn't quite "Dad, not yet," but it was a door opening, and for Owen, it felt like the most important title he'd ever been offered. It happened on a Tuesday. The sky outside Owen's office was the color of steel, heavy with rain that hadn't yet fallen. He had just finished a quarterly board presentation and was sipping coffee at his desk when his phone buzzed. It was a number he didn't recognize, Social Services. For a moment, he felt the now familiar surge of concern rise in his chest. He answered quickly, standing up as though movement would somehow prepare him for bad news. "Mr. Miller, this is Carla Benson from Family Services," the voice on the other end said politely. "I wanted to inform you that Bella's biological mother has filed a petition to regain custody." Owen felt the word settle into his bones like cold water. He set his coffee down without realizing it. "I thought she relinquished all parental rights." "She did. But under Washington state law, a parent can file for reinstatement under certain circumstances. She's submitted evidence of completing a rehab program and has a new residence. The court is obligated to schedule a hearing." Owen didn't speak for a moment. The idea of Bella being pulled from her new home, from the fragile safety they had worked so hard to build, was almost unbearable. He thought of her laughter that had begun to emerge, of her finally sleeping through the night, of the way she sat beside him on the couch during movie nights as if she belonged there, because she did. "When is the hearing?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Next Friday morning. 9 a.m. You will receive formal notice and have the opportunity to present a response." Owen ended the call and stood silently in the middle of his office. A storm had started to gather inside him, much louder than the one building outside his windows. That evening, Bella was her usual quiet self, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, drawing shapes with crayons while Owen prepared dinner. He didn't tell her about the hearing. Not yet. She was still too fragile, her past still too close. But he watched her differently that night. He noticed how she gently placed her crayons back in the box when she was done. How she checked the stuffed rabbit for bedtime dirt before laying it beside her pillow. How she looked back at him before closing her bedroom door, as if needing to confirm he was still there. Owen knew what had to be done. He called his legal team the next morning and explained everything. Most of them were shocked. A few advised him to stay out of it. "She's not your responsibility," one lawyer said. The courts leaned toward reunification. Owen ended the call mid-sentence. He hired a family law attorney the same day, one with a reputation for fighting hard, even against the odds. Her name was Dana Whitmore, and when he explained the situation, she didn't blink. "She's already yours, isn't she?" Dana asked. "Yes," Owen replied. "She just doesn't have my last name yet." They began building a case. Documentation of Bella's psychological progress. Her school counselor's observations. Testimonies from the therapist. Owen provided everything. He was warned that the system often failed kids like Bella, tossed back and forth between people who wanted them and people who simply wanted not to look like monsters. The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray, much like the day he had first met Bella. She wore a pale yellow dress that Claire had helped her choose, her hair pulled back neatly with a clip shaped like a tiny star. Claire came too. She had become a steady presence in their lives, kind and nurturing, someone Bella had begun to trust deeply. They sat together in the courthouse waiting area, Bella between them, small hands holding tightly to both adults. Owen didn't know what he expected when Bella's mother entered the courtroom. Maybe regret. Maybe shame. But he saw neither. The woman looked impatient, disinterested, her eyes avoiding Bella entirely. She wore heavy makeup and sat slouched in her chair like she was waiting for a doctor's appointment. When the judge entered, the courtroom stood, then settled into silence. The hearing began with procedural introductions. Then the mother's lawyer presented their case. She had completed a 6-week rehab program, was now living in a subsidized apartment, and had begun looking for part-time work. When the judge asked if she wanted to say anything to her daughter, the woman shrugged and said, "She's still little. She'll get over it." That was the moment Owen knew. The courtroom, the system, the process, it all meant nothing if that woman walked away with Bella in her arms. He stood when his lawyer called him forward. He spoke clearly, directly, his voice firm but not dramatic. He talked about Bella's growth since arriving at his home. How she now smiled without flinching. How she had nightmares less often. How she had started humming when brushing her teeth, a sound that nearly broke him the first time he heard it because it meant she was beginning to feel joy. She's not a burden. She's not a problem to be solved. She's a child, Owen said to the court. And she deserves more than biology. She deserves stability. She deserves love. Bella was called forward to speak, but the judge noticed her small body shaking and allowed her to remain seated with Claire. Instead, her therapist read a letter Bella had written in their last session. It was simple. It said, "I like where I live. I feel safe. I want to stay with Owen. He reads stories, and he doesn't yell. I'm not scared at night anymore. I think this is my real home now. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge had to pause. At the end of the hearing, the judge's voice was calm and decisive. Custody shall remain with Mr. Miller. The court finds that the petitioner has not demonstrated sufficient change or intention to act in the best interest of the child. This child deserves permanence. As the gavel came down, Bella turned to Owen with wide, trembling eyes. "Does this mean I don't have to leave?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen took her hand in his and said the words he'd been aching to say for weeks. "You're staying home, sweetheart. You're already home." In the weeks following the hearing, life began to unfold with a new rhythm, gentler, warmer, and no longer overshadowed by the fear of loss. Bella remained quiet in some ways, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not the silence of survival but the peace of beginning to trust. She started waking up without fear in her eyes. Her first instinct in the morning was no longer to listen for doors slamming or voices raised, but to come into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, looking for Owen. It was subtle, but Owen noticed it every time, the way she would peek into the room to make sure he was still there. When she saw him, something in her shoulders would relax. That, to him, was everything. The house itself changed, not dramatically, but in ways that mattered. The guest room was no longer a guest room. Owen had hired someone to repaint it in soft lavender, the color Bella had pointed to once in a book without realizing anyone had noticed. The shelves were now filled with more than just books, art supplies, stuffed animals, puzzles, and a little globe that she liked to spin. The bed had a comforter with stars on it, and a nightlight shaped like the moon sat on the table beside it. Owen had never known how much joy a child's laughter could bring to a place until he heard Bella singing quietly to herself while brushing her hair. Claire became more present in their lives, though she moved at Bella's pace. She never forced affection, never demanded to be called anything special. But her kindness was steady. She brought over cookies to bake, stories to read, and always asked Bella's opinion on everything, from what movie to watch to which flowers to plant in the balcony garden. It was Bella, not Owen, who first asked Claire if she would come with them to the school open house. That small question, spoken so shyly, was like a door being opened without anyone having to knock. Owen found himself changed in ways he couldn't have predicted. He had always been structured, meticulous, a man who thrived on plans and outcomes. But now he was the man who left work early to pick up a smiling 6-year-old from art class. He learned how to braid hair, badly at first, and how to make grilled cheese without burning it. He learned to sit on the floor and build castles from blocks, even if it meant papers from his briefcase had to wait. He didn't mind. He found that laughter, especially Bella's, was worth more than any signature on a deal. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Owen sat in the living room, flipping through a book while Bella lay on her stomach drawing pictures at the coffee table. Claire was in the kitchen, humming while she cleaned up the dishes. It was quiet, comfortable, the kind of silence that comes when people feel safe in each other's presence. Bella looked up and asked, "Can I ask you something?" Owen closed his book and nodded. "Of course." She hesitated, chewing on her lip for a moment. "Is it okay if I call you Dad?" Owen felt the breath leave his lungs. For a moment, he couldn't speak. He had imagined this moment, dreamed about it, but never dared to hope it would come so soon, so freely. He leaned forward and nodded slowly. "Yes, Bella. You can call me anything you want. And if that's what you want to call me, then I would be the luckiest man in the world." Her face lit up, not with a full, wide smile, but with something softer, more vulnerable and real. She walked over to him, climbed onto the couch beside him, and nestled into his side. He wrapped an arm around her without thinking. Claire walked in and paused in the doorway, watching them with a gentle smile, her hand pressed lightly to her chest. That night, after Bella had fallen asleep curled up in bed with the moonlight nightlight glowing beside her, Owen sat on the balcony with Claire. The city lights flickered in the distance, but his mind was with the little girl sleeping in the next room, the girl who had once sat on a courthouse bench believing no one wanted her. Now, she had a bedroom full of stars, a woman who braided her hair, and a man she had chosen to call Dad. "I didn't know I could love like this," Owen said quietly. Claire reached over and took his hand. "That's because it's the kind of love that changes you." He nodded, understanding now that real love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about presence. About showing up. About staying through the hard parts. And it was about a small voice asking if it was okay to believe in family again. For Owen, nothing in his life had ever been more important than the words she had spoken. Dad. And nothing ever would be. The following months unfolded like the turning pages of a quiet, beautiful book. What had once been temporary began to take the shape of permanence, not through formal declarations but through the thousand small, ordinary moments that wove themselves into something lasting. Bella no longer flinched when someone knocked at the door. She stopped watching the clock every time Owen left the room. Her drawings became brighter, filled with homes and families and smiling faces. The fear that used to live in her eyes had not disappeared entirely, but it had receded into the background, replaced by something new, trust. Owen had started the legal process for adoption the day after Bella called him Dad for the first time. There was no hesitation. He sat down with his attorney and began filing every necessary document. He underwent a second round of home evaluations, background checks, and psychological interviews. It didn't bother him. No amount of paperwork or scrutiny could compare to the value of knowing Bella would never again have to wonder if she belonged. Still, he kept it all quiet from her. He didn't want to get her hopes up too early. She had experienced too much uncertainty already, and he wouldn't risk giving her another promise that might break. Claire, meanwhile, had become a constant, natural presence in both their lives. She still lived in her own apartment, just a few minutes away, but she spent most of her time with them, especially on weekends. She and Bella had developed a bond that was both gentle and steady. Bella didn't call her mom yet, and Claire never asked her to. What mattered more was the way Bella instinctively reached for Claire's hand in public, or leaned into her side during story time. There was a quiet understanding between the two of them, something tender and unspoken. One Sunday afternoon in early spring, Owen decided they should spend the day at the park. It was sunny but cool, the first truly pleasant day after a long stretch of gray weather. Bella was ecstatic. She wore her favorite light jacket, packed snacks into a small backpack, and brought along her sketch pad. Claire packed a picnic. Owen carried the blanket and a football, though he doubted they'd use it. They found a quiet spot beneath a blossoming cherry tree, where the sunlight filtered through the branches like golden confetti. Bella ran to the playground, her laughter ringing out in the open air, while Owen and Claire spread out the blanket. For a while, they sat watching her, neither speaking much, just enjoying the peace of it. After lunch, as Bella sat cross-legged and began drawing a picture of the three of them, Owen turned to Claire. "I've been thinking," he said. She glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "That always sounds serious." He smiled faintly, then grew quiet again. "I've already filed the adoption papers." Claire reached for his hand without hesitation. "She's ready." "You're ready." "I know," he said. "But that's not all." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. It wasn't ornate or flashy, just a simple, velvet case that held something deeply meaningful. Claire froze, her breath catching as she realized what was happening. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever have a family," he said softly. "Not like this. Not one I didn't plan, didn't build, didn't control. But you came into our lives with so much grace, so much patience. You never tried to fix anything. You just stayed. And because of you, Bella smiles more. Because of you, I've become a better man. So I want to ask you something, not because I need you to complete this, but because you're already part of it." He opened the box, revealing a delicate engagement ring. "Claire, will you marry me? Will you be part of this family, not just in the ways that feel safe, but in every way?" Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded before she could find her voice. "Yes," she whispered, smiling through the emotion. "Of course, yes." From a few feet away, Bella looked up. She had been watching, though trying to look like she hadn't. She stood slowly, her drawing in her hand, and walked over to them. She stared at the ring, then at Claire, then at Owen. "Does this mean you'll really stay forever?" she asked quietly. Claire knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "Only if that's what you want, too." Bella nodded slowly, and after a long pause, she reached out and wrapped her arms around both of them. Owen held them close, his heart full in a way he never could have imagined a year ago. That evening, back at home, Bella finished her drawing. It was a picture of 3 people under a cherry tree, one tall, one smiling with curly hair, and one with a heart drawn over her chest. Above them, in her uneven handwriting, she had written just 2 words, "My family." The adoption day arrived on a clear morning in early June. The sky was a pale, brilliant blue, unmarred by clouds, and the city felt unusually calm, as though even the streets understood that something sacred was about to happen. Owen woke early, long before the sun had fully risen, and sat quietly in the kitchen, sipping coffee, thinking about how far they had come. Just over a year ago, he had walked into the courthouse to pick up a folder, focused only on business. He never could have imagined that, in the space of a single hour, his entire life would pivot. A frightened little girl sitting alone on a bench had cracked open something inside him that he hadn't even known was closed. And now, that same little girl would officially become his daughter. Bella was up by 6, already dressed in the white dress Claire had helped her choose, the one with tiny embroidered daisies along the hem. Her hair had been curled lightly, and she wore a silver bracelet that had once belonged to Owen's sister, a small token of family passed down with quiet reverence. Claire, radiant and calm, helped her zip up the back and placed a small flower clip in her hair. It wasn't just any day. It was the day her past stopped owning her and her future was finally hers. The courtroom where the adoption would be finalized was smaller than the one where Bella's custody had once been contested. It wasn't the same room, but Owen remembered it well, the way she had clung to his hand, the way she had whispered, "Do I have to go back?" He had promised her then that she never would. Today, he would keep that promise in full. Friends and a few close colleagues were present. Claire's parents had flown in from Oregon. Marie, Owen's longtime assistant, sat near the front, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The judge was an older woman with kind eyes and a warm smile, someone who had seen too many cases go the other way. She welcomed them with gentle words and explained the process with a grace that felt more human than legal. Owen stood with Bella in front of the judge, holding her hand as they answered the final questions. "Do you understand that this is permanent, Mr. Miller?" the judge asked, her voice kind but firm. "That you are taking full legal and parental responsibility for Bella, now and for the rest of her life?" Owen looked down at Bella, who looked up at him with steady eyes that no longer held the shadows they once did. "I do," he said. "And I've known it in my heart far longer than I've known it on paper." "Bella," the judge continued, "do you want Mr. Miller to be your father?" Bella's voice didn't tremble. "He already is." That was when the judge smiled and signed the final document. "Then by the power of this court and the laws of this state, I declare that from this day forward, Isabella Marie Rivers shall be known legally as Isabella Marie Miller. Congratulations." There was applause, the soft murmur of tissues being pulled from purses, and the clicking of photos being taken as Claire stepped forward and wrapped her arms around both of them. The 3 of them stood there, not as people stitched together by accident or crisis, but as a family, built slowly, with pain and patience, with choice. Afterward, they celebrated with a small reception in the rooftop garden of Owen's building. It was decorated with string lights and wildflowers, Bella's favorites. There was music playing softly and a cake that read, "Welcome home, Bella." She had picked it out herself, from the frosting color to the font. Claire stood beside Owen, her hand resting on his, as they watched Bella laugh with Claire's parents, dance to her own rhythm, and open gifts that included books, drawing supplies, and a necklace with a tiny gold star. "She's glowing," Claire said. "She is," Owen agreed, his voice quiet. "It's like she's finally breathing fully." Claire leaned into him and whispered, "You gave her that." "No," Owen replied. "We gave her that." Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the sky had turned soft and purple, Bella crawled into the large armchair in the living room, her newly framed adoption certificate in her hands. She looked at it for a long time before glancing up at Owen and Claire, who sat nearby on the couch. "Does this mean I'm really yours forever?" she asked. Claire nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. Forever." Bella seemed to consider that, then smiled. "Good. Because I don't want to go anywhere else. This is the only home I ever really had." Owen reached for her, pulled her onto his lap, and held her tightly. Her head rested against his chest, and he felt the steady rhythm of her breathing, slow, calm, safe. As the night deepened, he looked around at the space they had made together, the family photos that now hung on the walls, the books stacked haphazardly from their evening readings, the way Claire had draped a blanket across the back of the couch, and Bella's sneakers abandoned by the front door. This life wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was strong. And it was theirs. What had begun as a detour, a moment of unexpected compassion, had grown into something unshakable. Not because fate had written it that way, but because three people, each broken in their own way, had chosen each other, again and again, until the choosing became a home. Forever wasn't a word Owen used lightly. But tonight, holding his daughter in his arms, his fiancée beside him, and peace settling in like a long-awaited guest, he finally understood what it truly meant. To me, the ending of this story isn't just heartwarming, it's necessary. It closes a painful, jagged loop with something whole, not by erasing the past, but by honoring the survival that led to this point. Bella's journey from abandonment to belonging is not a fantasy, it's a reflection of what happens when someone refuses to look away. Owen didn't become a hero because he saved her, he became one because he stayed, listened, and chose to love her without conditions. That's what real transformation looks like, not loud, not dramatic, but patient, steady, and earned. What makes the ending powerful is that nothing magical happened. There were no grand miracles, no instant fixes. Just a man who refused to let a child fall through the cracks, a woman who walked in gently and stood firm, and a little girl who, despite everything, still dared to hope. In the end, family wasn't something they inherited, it was something they built, brick by brick, word by word, hug by hug. And that's what makes it unforgettable.